Thank you so much for joining us today. We will be talking about our report at the Central Valley Health Policy Institute at Fresno State titled Unequal Neighborhoods Merced. And this is a continuation of a series on unequal neighborhoods around the San Joaquin Valley that highlights the historical policies that leave a legacy today in various aspects of people's lives living in different neighborhoods in the, the very same city or geography within the San Joaquin Valley. When we talk about Merced, we think about a place that is really not very far from the Bay Area. However, it looks very different than those communities along the coast. The Merced also is quite large geographically speaking. Um, However, it is similar to other places in the San Joaquin Valley as it shares a history of policies that have shaped advantages for some while disadvantages for others that have left a legacy that is still seen today in those neighborhoods. Some of those policies included racial segregation, housing discrimination, and unequal economic investments that affected those communities. So when we think about how we see the neighborhoods in Merced vary today, we know that they were not just different by chance, they were intentionally created as different. And it's important to note that the whole place in Merced cannot be seen as one monolith, or even the city of Merced cannot be seen as just one city. In fact, what we see is that policies that were laid at their foundations there decades ago allowed for some to actually thrive and do well in the community. However, we know that in places where there are severe inequalities, everyone pays the price of an unequal place. So, to tell you a little bit about how we define these neighborhoods that we will compare, we'll tell you a little bit about the Merced BHC Place, which is a place that um, is contiguous and is in 14 census tracts in and around the city of Merced. So it also covers the communities of Planada and La Grande. These areas include places where historical based discrimination occurred and where immigrant communities were often placed there due to ordinances or unofficial designations of where they could live or they would be welcomed to live in. Over time, while those policies went away, the history and pattern of disinvestment in those places continued, and people lacked the necessary infrastructure to really thrive and to really even be considered as complete neighborhoods, often lacking things like sidewalks, ways to get around, and parks and grocery stores. On the other hand, there are other neighborhoods. These we saw were around the northern part of Merced County that were still around the city and were very specific communities where, even though they neighbored some of the BHC communities, such as the communities of Atwater, um, neighboring the communities of Beechwood and Franklin, they actually had very different histories. There, we saw that there is a concentration of amenities like investments in infrastructure, grocery stores, green space such as parks, and also the investment of the University of California Merced campus and all the resources that that has brought. So when we compare these two neighborhoods, um, we see that even though they are next to each other, they really have very different outcomes and they look very different racially as well. From a racial breakdown perspective, we can see that the BHC Place neighborhoods are predominantly Latino, Hispanic, as well as include a big proportion of Asian, um, Pacific Islander, as well as mixed race and African American communities. On the other hand, we see the advantaged neighborhoods, again, even though they share borders with these BHC Place neighborhoods, we see that they look very different racially, where white make up 41% of the neighborhoods, and while Hispanic are still a strong part of those communities, we see less African American and Asian populations than we do in the BHC place. When it comes to outcomes, we see that even though, again, they may seem similar geographically, when we go into uh, the outcomes, we see that 12% of people within the BHC place have a bachelor's degree or higher, while nearly double that number is those with a bachelor's degree or higher in advantaged neighborhoods. So looking very differently, even though very similar geographically, the investments within those communities are really seen and felt. Another way in which they are seen and felt in the education system is within the access to gifted and talented programs. While we see that in the BHC place, most of the folks in the BHC place that are in GATE programs are Hispanic and Latino, we see that Asian communities have a small proportion and African American communities have a very small portion of access to those programs. On the other hand, we see that in advantaged neighborhoods, even though there is a similar Hispanic contingency demographically, we see them underrepresented in the advantaged neighborhood space when it comes to access to those programs. And we also see an overrepresentation of the mixed race and Asian populations there as well. It is important to note that when we looked at this data was actually pretty incomplete, as 20% of the schools that we used did not have an active GATE program in advantaged neighborhoods, and 60% of the schools in the BHC place did not have an active GATE program. So not only do we see disparities within the data of who is in the program, but also we see disparities of um, even having access to such programs within their schools if kids were in the BHC place versus in the advantaged neighborhoods. When it comes to different access of amenities, we also think about the air that we breathe, as we know that certain emissions, such as diesel emissions, can have a lasting effect on um, people, on their bodies, and on their overall abilities to thrive. Diesel emissions were a great disparity between those two neighborhoods, as we saw that in the BHC place, 60% of the communities there were seeing significant impact of diesel emissions, while only 28.84% of those advantaged neighborhoods were. And one might think, well, they are the same cities sharing the same roads. However, when we see where the BHC Place neighborhoods are, they did tend to um, be be in neighborhoods that historically didn't have a freeway, but a freeway was placed on them, um, and further not only divided those communities, but added that additional pollution burden when those freeways were built. And that has had a lasting effect. We also know that while in California, many people struggle with housing burden, there is a different story even within cities where housing burden can seem prominent for everyone. When it comes to Merced, we see that 22% of BHC Merced neighborhoods were seen as um, housing burdened, meaning that they were paying more than really what could be affordable for their household to be able to pay for housing while still being able to do the other things they needed to do within their household. Um, while in the place, there are only around 9.67 struggling with that. So this concludes our presentation on our report, which you can read more about on our website, and you can see the full infographics with more data and more explanations. We want to thank advocates and residents for their ongoing work to make Merced a place that is equal for all. And we want to thank the California Endowment for funding this work, as without them, it could not have been possible. If you want to learn more, you can visit cvhpi.org and look for our Unequal Neighborhoods Merced project. And you can also look for Unequal Neighborhoods Fresno to see more about that. Thank you so much.